Hello fellow Earthlings, it's Livs, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 10 rather emotional books. So some might call February the month of love. It could also just be the month of emotions. So I have 10 emotional books to recommend. If I've learned anything about BookTube, is that we all really like depressing books. So let's crack on into it. So the first book I have to cautiously recommend is The Kite Runner. This is a book I read last year, and I can't necessarily say that I enjoyed it. It's not an enjoyable read at all, but if you like emotional books, this one will punch you in the gut very, very hard and make you tear up a little bit. It's a story set in Afghanistan in the 70s, and it's about this friendship between these two boys, and one boy is very wealthy and the other boy is his servant, and something happens that is really, really terrible, and the wealthy boy doesn't acknowledge the bad thing that has happened and stops being friends with his best friend. And it kind of explores what that means for them, and then going into adulthood we follow our main character as he moves to America, starts this new life, but then is drawn back to Afghanistan, and it's kind of his redemption story. So it's very, very emotional. Definitely look up trigger warnings before reading this book because it'll hit you hard, but it's an excellent book and I'd recommend it if it's a book you feel like you can handle. Hey, the next book I have to recommend is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is a non-fiction book that explores the criminal justice system in the US, and it's more specifically set sort of in Alabama, where Bryan Stevenson works to try and get people who have been tries to overturn death row convictions, and exploring and him working with people who have been punished, who haven't committed the crime or have been punished in a way that doesn't fit the crime. So it's a very emotional book that will make you feel everything. It's still quite hopeful though. It's a bit more uplifting than some books, but it's definitely quite an emotional ride. But I think it's a really important book to read, and Bryan Stevenson did a really good job at writing this. I read the version for young adults, so I don't know really what the main differences would be with the one for adults, but I definitely really enjoyed it and would recommend it if you're after something like that. Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a delightful, tiny little Japanese book that will rip your heartstrings out. It won't even tug them, it'll rip them out of your chest. This book is about a magical cafe in Tokyo where you can, if you sit in a very specific seat when the ghost isn't in the seat, you can travel back in time to when you were previously at the cafe and have a final conversation with someone who has already been at the cafe. There are a lot of rules about the time travel, and it can be a bit slow at the start, but once you get into it, you're following all these different kind of almost short stories of different people having to travel back in time and say goodbye or try and alter the outcome of the previous conversation they had there to try and in some way alter the possibilities of the future. So there's some very, very, very sad stories in this book that will definitely hurt quite a bit, but I ended up really enjoying this book. It's one of my favorite books of 2020, I think, and it's very sweet, quite quick to get through once you're sort of past the first story. That one is very much introducing all the rules, but once you pass that, it's a fantastic, fantastic read. I'm going to assume the majority of us have already read The Perks of Being a Wallflower, but if you haven't, What are you doing? Get on it. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and it is definitely emotional. I also really enjoyed the film version, but read the book. The book's the best. This is a story of Charlie, who is writing letters to a mysterious person, kind of like a diary, but just talking about the things he's going through as he starts high school, the friends he's making, and the challenges that he is facing that are quite sad and quite serious, but it's overall a very hopeful and uplifting story, but it is very emotional. And I absolutely loved it. I think this is probably, yeah, my favorite like YA book of all time. It's brilliant. She is Haunted by Paige Clark is a short story collection I read last year. It kind of explores parts of the scary virus, but also what it means kind of to be a Chinese Australian woman, to explores like relationships and challenges connecting to people and trying to understand other people and exploring, you know, different issues and topics that are very relevant in Australia but everywhere really. I don't really know how to describe it other than it is quite an emotional experience, and I would just recommend giving it a shot if you're into kind of more surrealist stories and just a bit of pain. It's a bit of pain, but it's good pain. You'll enjoy it. Codename Helen is a book that my partner didn't enjoy, but I loved it, and according to the majority of people on Goodreads and Storygraph, they enjoy it too, so I'm going to recommend it anyway. This is a fictional retelling of the story of Nancy Wake, who was known as the White Mouse, and she was a journalist in France in sort of the 30s and 40s, and she became a spy for the British during the Second World War. And she's really cool. If you don't know anything about her, I definitely recommend reading up about her. But I really enjoyed this book. I think it did a really good job of telling her story in a unique way. There's definitely a lot of really horrific things that she witnessed that are all based on true events, so it's very I found it very impactful and really enjoyed just, I don't know, the uniqueness of it all. So I would definitely recommend it if you're into more historical fiction or World War II stories, or if you do like a lot of non-fiction. This does incorporate a lot of the truth, so you might really enjoy this one. Following along in a similar vein, we have The Book Thief. Now, I'm sure most of you have already read The Book Thief, but if you haven't, read it. This is another one of my all-time favorite books. It's set in, once again, in Nazi Germany, but it's a story told by Death. Death narrates this story, and it's about this young girl who, I don't remember if it was her foster family or she's adopted, but she goes to live with this new family and she starts stealing books. And, you know, she might steal one from someone on the train or from book burnings or different situations. And it's about her learning to love books in this very dangerous time. But you've also got so much else happening around her she just doesn't quite understand. And I don't want to say more than that because you kind of need to go in relatively blind to this one, but it is such a beautiful, well-told story. I loved it. I don't know anyone who doesn't love this book, so I would definitely recommend giving it a go if you haven't already. The Housekeeper and the Professor is another tiny little Japanese book that stole my heart. This is only about like 250 pages. It's a story of a housekeeper and her son, her 10-year-old son, and the relationship they develop with this old maths professor. And the professor was in a car accident and he can only remember sort of 80 minutes at a time. So if every day when she shows up to work, he doesn't know who she is, and she has to introduce herself to him all over again. But through math, surprisingly enough, math is very important in this book. They kind of get to learn about how to communicate with each other even though he can't remember her. And the relationship he develops with her son is particularly beautiful because you can just tell that this little old man just adores children, and even though, you know, they have to start at the beginning every day, it's so beautiful, it's so delightful, it's very emotional. I absolutely loved and adored this book. And last, I have two books that I've read very recently that definitely felt quite emotional, and the first is Malibu Rising. I didn't think this book would affect me quite as much as it did, but I definitely felt it. If you've read any Taylor Jenkins Reid books, you'll know a little bit about Mick Reaver, who has been in Daisy Jones and the Six and was one of the husbands in The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It's a story of sort of his relationship with his first wife and their children. And it very much explores sort of the impact he leaves on his children and that their mother leaves on the children as well. And it's mostly set on one day in Malibu when the kids are all in their 20s and they're throwing this huge party at the eldest sister's house in Malibu, and it's all around that day. And you definitely feel a lot of emotions in this book. Just exploring what it's like to be abandoned by a parent is a very big theme in this book, and also dealing with their mother, the issues that their mother ends up kind of developing as she's slowly coming to terms with the fact that she has also been abandoned. And just, it's really impactful, and you feel the pain of going through what these children went through. And I love this book. It's definitely one of my favorite Taylor Jenkins Reids. And the last book I have to talk about is The Song of Achilles. What a shock. I finally read it, and yes, it is amazing, and it's very emotional. This is the love story between Achilles and Patroclus as they meet as children, and then going on into adulthood as they sail off to Troy. And it's sad. I didn't think it was going to hit me until one particular bit where it hit me real hard. It hit me real hard. So I love this book. I definitely recommend it if you're into Greek myth retellings. Even if you're not, if you just like a good love story, this is great. I recommend all of these if you are after something that'll make you feel some emotions. These are some top-notch books for that. But that's it for this video. Let me know what your favorite emotional books are in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.